Thank you. Just to give you a little bit about who's going to be yakking at you for the next, how many hours do we have? My flight doesn't leave till after 8 tomorrow morning, so I'm good to go. Yeah. I'm the president of Life Issues Institute. We are an international pro-life educational organization, and we do a lot of research, writing. We have lectured in many different countries. A lot of our literature has been translated into many different languages. And in the 90s, the issue of men and abortion kind of got on our radar. And I'm going to share with you, several people ask me why I'm so passionate about sharing the pain of fathers after abortion. And I'm going to share with you a letter that was sent to us that started this whole thing for me. But back in the mid-90s, we realized we were missing the boat. We're aware of the pain that women suffer after an abortion. Most people are aware of that. Whether they want to acknowledge it or not, that's different. But very few realize that men hurt too. Men are the forgotten victims. Men are often the ignored victims. And so I want to tell you a little bit about the issue of men and abortion. There's been very precious little research done on men and abortion. But what has been done was done by Arthur Shostak and his fellow PhDs. They were all supportive of abortion. They talked to 1,000 men in abortion facilities as their partners were having abortions. And then they followed up with a section of 75 doing phone calls or in-person interviews with them. And what they found was about 8% of the people, of the men involved with an abortion are severely emotionally impacted by that. And that means we've had 63.4 million abortions since 1973. So that means over 5 million men are literally walking wounded, severely impacted. And a lot of the violence we see in today's society, I fear, may be associated with past abortion. I want to tell you about Vic Pedresi. He was from Minneapolis. He was living with a woman who had an 18-month-old daughter. She got pregnant, and Vic was thrilled. He loved that little daughter of hers, and he was so thrilled to have a baby of his own. But unbeknownst to Vic, she changed her mind, and she went and had an abortion. And he was furious. And he went to her house. An argument ensued, and it escalated. He took out a gun, and he said, "You killed my baby, I'm going to kill yours." And he shot the little 18-month-old girl that he loved so much right in front of the mother. He then pointed the gun to himself, to his head, and pulled the trigger and left the mother to mourn the loss of her daughter, born daughter, and perhaps her aborted daughter. This is on the extreme case of cases that we've seen, but there have been several extreme cases that we are aware of. A lot of those vary from mild depression to situations like this. So why do you think men are impacted by abortion? So in order to find that, we needed to see what a man's psyche is all about, what drives him. And a man is driven to succeed in 5 key areas. We call them the 5 Ps because they all start with the letter P. So procreate is first on that, and man's desire to procreate, have children, is very strong. He plays an important part in the continuation of the human race. Some feminists probably don't like that, but that is an essential fact of life. And So participating in conceiving a child, watching that child grow is really important to a man. The second one is perform. And we talk about man's ability to perform. We're talking about more than sexual performance. We're talking about job performance. Job is one thing that really defines the success of a man. The income it generates, the toys that he buys with it, the admiration of his peers. So job is really important to a man as far as success goes. Pleasure is the third one. And obviously there's the pleasure of sex and a sexual relationship, but it goes well beyond that. It's the pleasure of finding a mate, getting married, having children, and watching them grow. The fourth one is provide. Now, a man's reproductive cycle ends at the moment that a woman becomes pregnant and her cycle takes over completely. So the man switches from procreating to providing for that family that will grow and expand. And then the last one is protect. Men are highly programmed to protect their offspring, and that should not be underestimated. It's worth repeating. Men are highly programmed at protecting their children, and I believe this is at the core and the heart of the situation of what grieves a lot of men after an abortion. And when a man experiences these through an abortion, it can totally obliterate or seriously damage his psyche. Now, what are the symptoms when a man is struggling after abortion? You know, it's said that the conscience is what hurts when everything else feels so good. And one of my colleagues who counsels fathers of children lost to abortion, as I do, Warren Williams said that anger is the visible part of the iceberg. And every man that I have counseled, every man that my colleagues have counseled, have all said that anger was a central issue that had to be dealt with. Early pioneers of helping men coined the term hooking. And by that we mean a man will see, hear, taste, smell, touch something that reminds him of the abortion experience and act out in anger. He or the victims surrounding him may be scratching their heads wondering what the heck was at the core of that anger. Many times guys don't understand why their life is in a downward spiral, and they haven't connected abortion to that. Men, another thing with anger can often be pointed toward the woman who had the abortion, particularly if he did not want to have the abortion. He couldn't do anything to stop it. The laws, of course, are stacked against us guys. Your child's life can be hanging in the balance and you have no legal recourse, especially here in Michigan, where it is absolutely dismal, the dangers that unborn babies and their parents face in this state. Let me tell you a little bit about the need to protect. As per the media, who wrote about James, a 19-year-old freshman from the University of California, Santa Cruz. He faced charges of auto theft, burglary, assault with a deadly weapon, and felony battery. So what counted up all these charges? His attorney describes his client as one who has nothing to do with any fringe groups, and he has no criminal record. He's a vegetarian who doesn't drink or smoke or do drugs. Kind of a pretty vanilla kind of guy. But he's, according to his attorney, he's very concerned about his unborn child. James had accompanied his girlfriend and another friend to the abortion clinic for a scheduled abortion. But once there, James balked and tried to talk his girlfriend out of having the procedure, which she did not agree to. He was ejected and locked out of the building. Well, James then rammed the friend's car into the back wall of the clinic, and entered the building before he was arrested, all in an attempt to protect his unborn child. He did actions that were totally out of his character, but he was desperate to protect his child. Some of the things that men will go to after an abortion is alcohol and drugs to dull the pain of the abortion, or in some cases, in their minds, of being too weak not to stop the abortion. And some of that may be healthy guilt, some may be unhealthy guilt, which we'll talk about in a minute or two. But oftentimes they tried and couldn't, and still piled that shame and grief on themselves for that. Other times, men will become workaholics to avoid contact with other people, to keep that deep, dark secret, but also to make up for an area where in his mind he failed miserably in the abortion, but he wants to succeed in his job, which is a highly defining issue for a man's life. Makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? Relationships most always fail. There are exceptions, but most always they fail after an abortion. Future relationships with women can be difficult or can be impossible. There is sexual dysfunction that we have seen. Some men have experimented with homosexuality, and the reason for this is it's a sexual outlet, but there's no worry about pregnancy, thus no worry about abortion and going through that anguish again. Some have other forms of sexual dysfunction as impotency and addicted to pornography and masturbation as sexual outlets without the worry of pregnancy and abortion. I want to tell you about Ben, whom we counseled. This is a real life situation. He didn't have nightmares after the abortion. He had waking dreams. And some of those involved when he was driving, he'd feel the sense of a baby touching his elbow as he was driving. You can imagine how unnerving that would be for him. He'd feel the baby's pull at his knee or pant leg at times. And then when he was in bed or laying on the couch, sometimes he'd feel the weight of an infant on his chest. And those of us who have felt all those things know exactly what he was going through. It was just very difficult for him. He had nightmares of seeing his baby pulled apart limb from limb and seeing his girlfriend go through the anguish of the abortion. Many, many men have told me they've gone through the same thing with that. Sleeplessness was a constant companion, and he would often cry, which is a good thing if he can cry to help mourn the loss. Now, I want to tell you a little bit about Ben. That's not his real name, of course, but he was the proverbial tall, dark, and handsome guy. He had a great job, and he had a really nice car. And so he had a very active social life. And after the abortion, he stopped dating because he thought women wouldn't want to have anything to do with him because he was involved with the abortion. And he had fears that he'd never be able to have a physical relationship with a woman ever again. So that's where he was. When we encountered him, I'm happy to tell you he's had that counseling and is leading a productive life. I'm assuming by now he's probably married. Now, other symptoms that we've seen in fathers who've lost children to abortion are panic attacks, poor coping skills, flashbacks, nightmares, and self-imposed isolation. Those are all really dangerous, especially the self-imposed isolation. That's a big red flag. Now, what do you think Planned Parenthood's response is to the anguish that men have after abortion? Probably isn't surprising. But Louise Tyler, she was then the vice president of medical affairs at Planned Parenthood, had this to say about men and abortion. But it doesn't matter how much men scream and holler that they are being left out. There are some things that they are never going to be able to fully experience. I say tough luck. Yeah. Talk about cruelty. You know, they say that wisdom comes with age, but sometimes, in her case in particular, I think age arrived alone. And you want to, sometimes you're tempted to think these people are a waste of skin, but there is redemption. Some of my best friends were former abortionists and former people who worked in the abortion industry. I don't know if you saw the movie Unplanned with the story of Abby Johnson. I interviewed her for my weekly TV program that we were doing just weeks after she got out of the abortion industry, and we've been fast friends ever since. Some of our best ambassadors for the babies are those who come out of the abortion industry. So we try to keep that in mind when we encounter such harshness. Now, how do we deal with the symptoms? The biggest problem we have to help men is to identify them, have them come forward, and go through the healing process. And so here are some of the things that we can do to help men. They are taught, you know, we men are taught we can take care of things by ourselves, you know. Pull it yourself up by your bootstraps and carry on. Well, abortion is different. Anyone who's experienced abortion, it's just too big for you to handle alone. There are too many things you cannot see. There are too many things you can't understand about abortion and the things that you need to think through and face realistically. We have a habit of twisting memories and things in ways that are very unhealthy. And that is called healthy guilt and unhealthy guilt. And that's one of the things we teach the guys in counseling to know the difference. Healthy guilt is taking the responsibility for the sexual relationship and for the pregnancy that resulted. Unhealthy guilt would be taking responsibility for the abortion if you tried everything you could do to stop it but couldn't. So when we can define in the guy's minds, you're not responsible for this, let it go, then that is like taking a weight off the shoulders of some guys. So, you know, men are really hated in the abortion industry, and they have no societal incentive to grieve for the loss of their child or even think that they have a right to. When I called one father that I had counseled a father, he absolutely broke down in tears. He never once thought of himself as a father. He never dared think of himself as a father, but when I told him he was, and that's okay, that's your right because you do have a child, that child just isn't living on this earth anymore. So it's okay for them to grieve. We want them to cry. Sometimes we cry with them. And you have to grieve the loss of a child, whether it's unborn or whether it's a newborn, whether it's a toddler, or whether it's a teenager. There is grief associated with losing your child. And unsuppressed grief or suppressed grief will turn into depression and other things that are harder to treat. So the sooner we can help a man, the better off he is. He must grieve for the death of his baby. You know, and what will help a man grieve for the loss of his child is to make that baby real. Because like a miscarriage or an aborted child, a lot of people view this child as some spirit in the great unknown somewhere, but these were flesh and blood children. They had a life. And what helps men to understand that this baby is real is to name that child. I do counseling once a week with the guys for an hour or so, depending upon how long they need to talk. And then I give them homework to do before we meet the following Tuesday. Well, this one man had an abortion 11 years prior. He thought he had worked through everything. His wife and I disagreed, and I said, well, come to the counseling. We'll turn over the rocks and see if we find any grenades. And he said, okay. So when I gave him his homework that night and said, "You need to name your baby," he had this funny look on his face, and he opened his mouth to talk, and I said, "No, we're not going to talk about it now. You come back Tuesday night with that name of your baby, and then we'll talk about it." And when he came back that Tuesday, his face was glowing. Before I could say anything, he said, your work assignment changed my life. And I knew why, but I asked him, and he said, "My baby is now real to me." And he's able to grieve that child because that baby is real in his mind. That's a really important step that we need to take with him. So, another topic that we really need to work hard with guys on who suffer from a loss of a child to abortion is forgiveness. Because as we said, there's lots of anger, and with that, there's a lot of forgiveness that needs to be done. And sometimes we have to work really hard on that issue. Now, Mark Twain had this to say about forgiveness, and it's perfect for this situation. He said, "Forgiveness is the fragrance of the violet left on the heel that crushed it." Let me repeat that. I kind of messed it up. Forgiveness is the fragrance of the violet left on the heel that crushed it. And isn't that so perfect for the situation we're talking about? Now, unresolved anger toward others can eat away at his soul. And unresolved anger gives the individuals he's angry with power over him. And it's important then that we tell fathers what forgiveness is and what it isn't. And this really helps them take that step in forgiveness. Forgiveness is not excusing, forgetting, or reconciliation. It's none of those. Forgiveness, according to my friend who wrote a book on this, Catherine Coyle, she said, "It is the conscious decision to withhold retribution and resentment and to instead offer mercy to the undeserving offender." So when you boil it down, you dissect the sentences, so to speak. These are things that he can't do on his own. But as we walk him through this process, we begin to see a change. And it is just really a delight to see that. When we talk to guys and counsel them, there is an accountability process too. A lot of them were in lifestyles that led to pregnancies and abortions. And we counsel them to avoid those situations. And if he's running in circles that support that, enable him to do those things, then we say get out of that circle of friends, make new friends. Whether it's developing friendships in a church or in some other environment where there is positive reinforcement and support for leading a lifestyle where he doesn't need to worry about pregnancy and abortion. And then there comes a time when we draw a line in the sand and we say, okay, as your counselor, I'm stepping back and you're going to go solo. And in his life, for the remainder of his life, he will remember that moment as, this was before my healing, this is after my healing. Now, we're not asking a father to ever forget, to stop feeling sad about the abortion. It'll be like a festering wound, the grief and remorse and shame after abortion. You have to go through the sometimes painful process of lancing that festering wound, drain out all the pus and everything, and let it heal. Now, there'll always be a scar there, but you'll look at that and remember, and sometimes you'll feel sad, sometimes you'll cry. But you will have been healed to the point where you can go on and lead a productive life and lead a happy life. Have the ability to establish a relationship, get married, and maybe have children. Live out those 5 Ps, or at least some of them. Everybody has their own definition of success in their lives. But we want to equip them to move forward so that they can do that. And it's funny, I usually have the counseling at the end of the day when people were leaving the office, and it was just the two of us because confidentiality is a big deal. And my assistant there at the desk, she said when he came in at the beginning, he wouldn't even look at me. He looked sad all the time, kind of angry, didn't speak. But at the end, when he left, she said he looked her in the face, he smiled, and he was genuinely happy. What we do with men to help them draw that line in the sand is we'll have them do something memorable. One guy that I counseled put a tree in the front of his yard to memorialize his daughter. Another guy made a boat out of wood. He was a crafty sort of fellow, and he painted his son's name on that boat, went to a little creek and put that boat in the water and watched it bob away out of sight, and said goodbye for now. I won't see you, but I'll see you someday. Ways in which you can get closure and put the period after the sentence is what we want them to be able to do, and not go back to that and continue to feel the remorse. It's really important when a father reaches out. That's so very hard for a man to do. And it's really important that we're there to help him in a way that he can receive that help. I remember back when this first was an issue in the 90s, I became the founding member of the Men in Abortion Network called MAN. And our mission was, there were about 12 of us who were experts in this field of men in abortion. And our mission was to get the pro-life movement to be aware that men suffer this anguish and that they need help. And to our delight, the pregnancy centers immediately jumped on board enthusiastically, understanding men need help also. And for some of them, you know, they're just hearing the bad side of the man's story all the time, what a jerk he was, and for them to have men come in and tell their stories. Ideally, it's great to have a couple come in. That's a pretty rare situation. But then it diminishes the gender bashing. And when a woman sees how broken her partner is over the abortion, or vice versa, that really opens up the line of communication, opens the line of understanding, empathy, and forgiveness when they see that. So we need to make sure that men realize that whatever they say is kept in confidence. I recommend that men counsel men for the reason that the first session is just letting them talk and me taking notes. We talk about the relationship and what led to the pregnancy, and sometimes they'll tell me things that they really think I'm going to be judgmental about. So they'll throw it out there and just watch my face. And so some of the stuff will make the hair stand up on the back of your neck, but you can't react. And when they know that you're not going to judge them, that they have trust with you, then that's when everything just starts to flow and the healing is able to begin. So it's a wonderful, wonderful thing to see a man transform before your very eyes, and to know that you played a small part in that you just facilitated the important information that they needed to walk that path to healing. So at the Men in Abortion Network, we developed a website called menandabortion.net and menandabortion.net. It is designed exclusively for hurting fathers and the people that want to help them. There are various studies, that we call them studies, that they can go through with a counselor to walk that path to healing. There are various resources. We have books. It's important to understand the way that men grieve differently from women and the ways that we can meet their needs that are different. And some of that information can be found at that website, menandabortion.net. We also have videos and various other things there. But of great importance is up front and center on this website is a way that a man can reach out for help. And if he wants to do it confidentially, all we need to know is the city that he's in or town. And then what we do is we research counselors for men. And then we make sure there's a qualified guy who can help him on the other end. And then we give him his contact information. And he has to make the first step. And that's very important, that he makes that first step and reaches out for help. And sometimes they'll go, and I tell them, you're going to feel better after our first meeting, but don't be fooled. You're not healed. And sometimes they listen to that advice, and not always, though. So as I said, well, before I get to this letter, I want to say that men who have suffered abortion and are quietly grieving maybe they don't even understand why they're grieving, are all around us. They're on this campus, they may be in this room, they're in our churches, they're in grocery stores, on golf courses, everywhere, bike paths, everywhere men are is where hurting men are. When you're talking about 63.4 million abortions, those are 63.4 million men who had input to that conception, to that pregnancy, and are fathers, whether they want to acknowledge it or not. So again, I think a lot of the violence that we may be seeing could possibly result from the anger issues built up by the grief and shame that comes along with abortion. When we are out there in the public squares, as your group is, and you come across women and men that are just crazy, mad, impossible to control their emotions and lash out, those are the ones that I worry about, that they're hurting. So if we can offer help and healing, they may not take it there when they're going through their throes of anger and whatnot, but maybe they'll keep that information as a seed, and maybe that will grow in their mind and heart, and they may reach out for the help that they need. Now, here is why I am so passionate about the guys and the help that they need. I was at a meeting and came back to the office, and my assistant at the desk was crying, and I was alarmed. I said, "What's wrong?" And she couldn't really talk. She just says, "It's on your desk." And I went in there, and there was this handwritten letter from, I'll call him Tom, and he just put it out there, and I want to share this with you, and then I think you'll understand. So this is what the letter said. Dear Life Issues Institute, 10 years ago, my younger brother, whom I will call John, then 24, met and fell in love with a young lady. He proposed marriage some time later, but she refused, opting instead to move in with John. With a very good job and a promise of a bright future, John could see no reason not to oblige. A few months afterward, his girl became pregnant. John was ecstatic, but the mother was not. And despite the father's plea on behalf of saving his child's life, she sought the services of an abortionist and killed their baby. John entered into a deep depression. He would come by my home 3 to 5 times a week to sit and cry. Those are good signs, actually, for grieving a loss of a child. His brother continues, it took a long, long time and many prayers before he seemed to come around. A week after their second year together, she was again pregnant. But John was apprehensive. He came to me for advice on how he might be able to stop a second abortion if she chose that route. Immediately, we began to search for a pro-life attorney who could perhaps render sound advice. And even though we located one nearby, he could only tell us that the way the laws are written, the father had no legal recourse. His girlfriend killed their second baby after 3 months of pregnancy. John would not talk to anyone. He broke off the relationship with his girlfriend, quit his job, moved back in with our mother, and stayed in his room most of the time, depressed and lonely. These are really big red flags. His brother continues. Roughly a month after the second abortion, John rode up to my house on his bicycle and handed me a small black book to keep for him in a safe place. He seemed alert and happy to a degree, so I put the book in my bedroom and honestly thought no more about him. The next morning, my mother went to the garage to get her car for work. She found John hanging from the rafters by his bike. Since I lived only a few blocks away, she called me first, hysterically, screaming into the phone. When I arrived at her house, I was met with the most horrible nightmare I could imagine. My mother was trying to hold up my brother, thinking she could somehow bring him back to life. The coroner later placed the time of death at about 11 p.m. And it doesn't take a medical degree to realize what gravity does to tissue hanging that long overnight. In total shock, it was the next day as we were making funeral arrangements when I remembered the little black book John had given me for safekeeping. I opened it and began to read. The contents were basically what I have related here, but it ended like this. I cannot believe there was nothing we could do. These were my children too, and I loved them. I cannot live any longer with the pain and guilt that I have. May God and my family forgive me. I love you, John. Almost 7 years ago, John took his own life. My mother and one of my sisters are both still in deep depression, and I am haunted by visions of that ghastly morning when I witnessed that horrible scene. They will never get that image out of their mind, never. I can only hope and pray that God in his infinite wisdom and mercy heard the heart cry of my brother sometime before he lost consciousness. I do not know what happened to John's girlfriend. After John moved out of their apartment, she sold everything and moved to the West Coast. We have never heard from her. I doubt she even knows about my brother. But I do hope and pray that she has made peace with God. Thank you for letting me share this with you, and may God bless you richly for your commitment to life. So what do you do with a letter like that? You don't put it down and put it in a file cabinet and forget about it. For me, this was God's way of placing something on my heart in a very passionate way. I just couldn't let John's death mean nothing. Something good had to come out of that. And as a result, so much has. It's a shame that a life had to be taken in order for that to happen. But out of the ashes of John's life, there have been a lot of good that has been done for fathers who are suffering, like John. See, abortion's a malignancy. It hurts, it destroys, it shames, everything it touches. It's nearly impossible to control. And wherever it goes, it spreads pain and misery and hurt and anguish and guilt. And our job is to stand in the gap between John and the rope. Future men who cannot take the pain and anguish. When I was just married, my wife and I were living in Cody, Wyoming. We grew up in Montana. I got affiliated with the local Right to Life chapter there. It was 1980. And the chapter president, her son, died by suicide. And he died because of the anguish that his girlfriend had an abortion. Back then, we thought this was just one of those things that happened, but probably won't happen again. And it took me until the mid-90s to wake up to understand that men hurt too, and that we need to be there for them. We need to understand their anguish. And if you are able to cross paths with a guy who's hurting, then you can send him to this website where he can find hope, help, and healing. I got a call from a young man. I wrote a brochure called Men Hurt Too, and I summarized the issue of men and abortion. And sidewalk counselors outside of abortion facilities thought it was a great tool. We did a lot of printings of that brochure because it was used so much. And a young couple in Chicago area went into an abortion facility for a late-term abortion. And somebody handed the young man my brochure. This is even hard to say. They were the only ones there. And this young man heard his baby cry in the back of the center. A lot of babies are born alive, and a lot of them are outright murdered after they take their first breath. Can you imagine living with the memory that you killed your own child and you heard that child cry out in desperation? He immediately called me, and the sound of his voice still haunts me to this day. But the thing was, we got him into counseling immediately, and we got him on the path to healing. So his child died, but we saved him, because otherwise I think he would have been another suicide statistic, because he was the kind of guy that just wouldn't be able to handle it without help. So what I do sometimes, a woman called me from Honolulu and said, she had my brochure, and she said, "You've described my husband to a T." She said, "How do I bring up the subject where he will accept it?" And I said, "Well, just leave the brochure laying out there. And if he doesn't read it, talk about the symptoms that men have as a result of abortion. And let them think about that. Let that sink in and have them look at their own life in a new light that may be caused by an abortion in their life or abortions." So there are many ways in which we can introduce the topic, but we need to be there. I'm hearing something, but oh, this one's working. Maybe you just turned it on. All those techie guys back there do such important work. So it's important that we let men know there's help, and whether they act on that offer or not, but we need to let people know on this campus that there's hope for men. And whether that's putting up a lot of posters that get torn down and keep putting it up, or find ways that you can somehow get that message out to guys that, you know, it's okay. You're not alone, and there's hope, there's healing. And when they hear those words on the phone, sometimes the guys cry, some sigh. There's always some sort of indication that they are relieved, grateful, encouraged by the fact that there's hope for them. So that is what I would hope can be done on this campus. We, of course, are available, I and other experts in this field, to help and assist. If there is a group of guys that want to help counsel men, we can probably do that over Zoom pretty effectively. I would even take all day to come up here again and help if that's what it took to get the help the guys need. So we at Life Issues Institute will be there to help you, but we also have probably 12 or 13 other individuals that will do that. One of the people that has really helped me a lot learn about this is a woman, and she came this close to committing suicide with a gun pointed against her head. And the only thing that saved her was her roommate was sick and came home early from work. And now she has an international organization that is helping women and men and families heal after abortion. So there, you know, out of the ashes come good things. So I think at this point I'll open it up for questions, if you have any. Yes.
I will have a question. So it's quite new to me, right? Because we typically hear in Hollywood, watching Hollywood movies or on the news, typically man is the person who pretty much very often forces women to go through abortion.
Mm-hmm. Yes, there are a lot of women that push, coerce, even force women into abortions. And I'll tell you, those are the ones that grieve the most. And I've counseled some of them. They balk at naming the child because they don't believe they have that right to do so. It can be very difficult. And what we're saying is, we're not saying all men grieve over the loss of a child. There are a ton of guys out there that are using sex as an instrument to use women for self-gratification. If a pregnancy occurs, they just want them to abort it and be gone. So we're not saying all men are good guys when it comes to this eventually, but there are enough that we really need to act and do what we can to help them. Yeah. Other questions? Yes.
Just out of curiosity, what is the strongest argument you've heard or used, just kind of against abortion?
The strongest argument against abortion. What I would say is abortion is the most urgent civil rights issue of our day in America, and that millions of babies are being killed simply because they are unwanted or their place of residence in the womb. A child may be a surprise, but no child is unwanted. And for those who have children and do not want them, we will have a line a mile long of couples, qualified couples, who would love to adopt that child. And even with children with Down syndrome, there's a waiting list for them also. No child is not unwanted. Every child is, yeah. Yes?
I'm curious as to how men grieve differently from women.
Yes, and I've seen this in myself when my mother died. Men are doers. Women are talkers and sharers. So let me just give you my example when my mother died. We were busy doing planning and everything. And when all of that was done and there was no more doing, I just totally fell apart and lost it. So when we help men, sometimes we need to come alongside them and talk while we're doing things. And then we help them do things to heal. Now, when you have, there are various courses that we take women and men through. My favorite one is this friend of mine who nearly committed suicide. She and now her husband have a book where they have combined sharing, talking, and doing things. And other ones that are better for women are those where it's just mostly sharing. And I counseled a guy once who insisted on doing the latter, the sharing part, but we lost him partway through because he just wasn't relating to it. Men, by instinct, want to do the 5 Ps as we've talked about. So we have to understand those and wrap those in the counseling process so that they feel like they are accomplishing something and doing. Does that help? There is a book on the website. Swallowed by a Snake is the name of the book. And I, to this day, don't understand that title at all. It's written by somebody who I believe is agnostic. And he talks about the ways in which we can help men grieve. And for those who are interested in helping men, I would highly recommend it because it gives some very practical, helpful information. Does that help? Not? No? Any other questions? Yes?
I remember Helen Kubler-Ross had the stages of death and dying. Go through the steps of rejection and denial and all that. Is that part of what is used, or is that?
Well, I don't think so, because our process is helping them realize that the baby's real. There is anger already there that we have to work to dissolve. A lot of anger toward the woman, toward the abortionist, toward the girls that talked his girlfriend into having an abortion. The one guy that had the abortion 11 years ago, he was biracial, and his parents didn't like him at all for that reason. And he had a lot of anger toward them because they pushed her to have that abortion. So I would say, yeah, it's pretty different from that. Yes?
Could you repeat the 5 Ps?
Repeat the 5 Ps. Absolutely. They are procreate, perform, pleasure, provide, and protect. And I would say the protect is the strongest in my experience. And that is the one that is so seriously damaged when an abortion takes place. The brochure that I wrote that summarizes the issue is available at that website in Spanish and English. So feel free to download it, print it off, use it however you'd like to. Any other questions? Yes?
Given that a lot of the focus of this talk is relating to men, what is your advice to all of the lovely young women here for how they might be able to help men in their lives?
Yes, how can women help men in their lives? Are you talking about men with an abortion in their past? Okay. If not, creating awareness that men hurt, giving them that brief and see if they would like to step into the gap to help. You know, sometimes it's just tiny little things that are done that can turn a guy around. So if they are their partner, for whatever degree of the relationship is, has an abortion, I would say to them they should sit down and talk about the symptoms of men and let them examine that in their own lives. This is a gentle way for them to kind of think it's their idea to get the help that they need. Showing them some of the tragic situations that have happened, that they don't want to be one of those, of course. Yes?
People who insist that unborn children aren't human.
Are not human?
Yeah.
What would I say to those? You know, that's a good question because we get that a lot, but we have a great answer. And somebody was telling me, I did a radio interview Monday regarding the Kaczmarek ruling on chemical abortion. Who's aware of that? A few, okay. Well, chemical abortion pills account for over half of all abortions done. And 4 pro-life organizations, medical organizations, and 4 pro-life doctors sued the FDA for authorizing chemical abortion in 2000 for doing it in a sloppy and political method. And they have lots of good evidence to do that. And the appellate court, Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, and what he ruled is that the FDA cannot authorize chemical abortion and just shut the whole thing down, which is huge. I mean, that's as big as reversing Roe for us. And no problem. They ruled on this last night and said that the pills could be sold, but they couldn't be used past 7 weeks instead of 10, and that they could not be mailed. And that is huge. That is really, really, really huge. And so I did a live radio interview with calls in, and somebody made that assertion that, well, it's not a baby. And for one thing, I said, well, a lot of us pro-lifers wear these feet pins on our lapels, and this is identical in size and shape to a baby 10 weeks after conception. There are fingers. They have toes. Any embryology book will tell you that these are babies. Carnegie stages, is anybody going into the medical field? It's probably not the university for that sort of thing, but the Carnegie stages are the gold standard for fetal development. Every embryology book around the world must use their information in those embryology books. And they say, without question, life begins at conception. And fertilization is so detailed, they broke it down to different phases even. Not just wham, bam, it's done. They broke it down in scientific stages. It is so detailed. And we know life begins at fertilization, and we see the beauty and wonderment of unborn babies. In any embryology book, it doesn't have to be us telling them. Tell them to go online or go into the library here on campus and look it up for themselves, and they will see that there certainly is life there. You know, that's when I've been involved in this for 46 years, and back when the first decade or two, they told us it's not a baby, not a baby, not a baby. Well, sonogram came out, and boom, it made liars of all of them. What happened was sonogram pictures were so cute, we parents had them in cubicles and offices, on key rings, on mouse pads, on backgrounds for computers. We sent them. When my first granddaughter came along and I saw her sonogram picture, I sent it to my international friends all around the world. And my son was embarrassed. I said, but you don't understand. We think babies are really cool. But seeing those and the enthusiasm that's behind those changed the landscape on abortion. It focused it on the child. And when we developed the Love Them Both phrase in the early 90s, and it's made a comeback because it's on your t-shirts and they gave me one, Love Them Both put the pro-abortion activists on the defense, and they have not been off the defense ever since, because we have overwhelming proof that these are babies, and there is beauty and wonderment. And you should see in pregnancy centers, most of them have ultrasound now, and you should see the couples who go in bent on abortion and they see their baby. There was this one woman, she was kind of big, and she not large, but she was kind of like a linebacker. She was a solid, tall individual, the kind you really wouldn't want to meet in a dark alley somewhere. And she was kind of rough around the edges, and she came in, and she was hell-bent on an abortion. And so they did, back then they just had the standard ultrasound, but they had the 3D also, but the stenographer wasn't there for the 3D, and she said she wasn't persuaded by the regular ultrasound. And they talked her into coming back the next day, which she did. And she got on that table, and they put the wand over her belly, and the baby's face just happened to be in the right spot. And she gasped, and she said, "That's my boyfriend's face." The picture was so crystal clear, she saw a resemblance to the father. And just like that, she went from hell-bent on having an abortion to hell-bent on saving her child and protecting her child. So we've got all the arguments, we've got the evidence, everything's on our side, and that's what drives the abortion advocates crazy. So we just have to reach out in love and do our thing, and we're winning. We really are. Yes?
What would you say to the argument that it's statistically safer for the woman to have an abortion than to carry a baby to term? I've heard that thrown around.
Yeah, we hear that a lot. And what they do is they compare apples to oranges. And it is not safer to have an abortion than it is to have a baby. We have information on our website that gets into some of the medical details with that. If you go to lifeissues.org, lifeissues.org, you will get that information. The other side is built on lies, and it has been from the beginning. Now, in the wake of Roe's demise, they're telling women that you can't get medical help for a miscarriage or an ectopic pregnancy because you'll be arrested for having an abortion. That's blatantly false. And we have on our website the laws pertaining to this issue in every single state. So all they have to do is go there and see what it is. Also, the laws that are being passed expressly say that women will not be charged for anything. But getting back to your issue, I'm wandering off the reservation here. It is not. What they are saying is they are taking deaths of women not only during pregnancy and delivery, but a year or two after birth. And they're incorporating all kinds of statistics that wouldn't be there. Plus, the statistics on women dying from abortion are so woefully incomplete. The information on the dangers of chemical abortion between 2002 and 2015, emergency room visits went up over 500%. Now, after 2015, we don't have any information because President Obama and the FDA decided that abortionists don't have to report any adverse reactions unless the woman dies. So they're covering up 95% of the problems caused by that pill. Now the roosters are coming home to roost, chickens are coming home to roost, with this chemical abortion pill. Some of that's coming out. And with that, though, they found that 60% of spontaneous abortions were really abortions associated with chemical abortion. So there's overwhelming evidence that chemical abortion is bad for women and it kills a baby. Plus, they're hiding that, and then they're also hiding the fact that these women are having abortions. I reached out to a physician and I said, is there any blood test they can do in the emergency room to determine if those chemicals are in her system? And I haven't heard back from her yet on that, but I'm hoping that can maybe be part of the protocol for ways that they can determine whether they're talking about a spontaneous abortion, and it's a medical term for miscarriage, or a therapeutic abortion, which is intentional.
You mentioned that it only has to be reported legally if the woman dies. Is that like immediately after the abortion, or is that also like years?
Well, it wouldn't be years. It'd probably be within the year that they'd have to report. There's probably an annual form that the abortion facilities would send in. But then they're telling us, the media and abortion advocates and politicians are saying that the abortion pill is safer than Tylenol. And that is outrageous. And it is irresponsible for women that they are saying that. And that's because the FDA has been hiding the ramifications. And there were thousands of them, life-threatening situations from that pill before they went underground with the information in 2016. Yeah. We've been dealing with lies since Bernard Nathanson, I don't know if you know that name, ran the largest abortion facility in the Western Hemisphere, personally oversaw 60,000 abortions. He was part of NARAL, the National Abortion Rights Action League, and they lied, flat out lied about the number of women dying from illegal abortion so they could get legalized. They were dumbfounded when the media took that information and ran with it. It was a blatant lie. And he then realized he's killing babies. He became pro-life. He's the one that brought us the silent scream. Are you familiar with that? Where he showed a suction abortion via ultrasound, and the baby opened its mouth in a silent scream. So he was a tremendous asset to us and the movement. He was a Jewish agnostic, which we loved parading him around because he was a unique voice for us in the movement. And then he converted to Catholicism, and we were happy about that, but we lost that edge there. But he died in his Catholic faith. And what a powerful voice. Yes?
Yeah. How do you think the in vitro fertilization industry, abortions, impact men? Perhaps more or less than other types of abortion?
In vitro fertilization, yeah. I know of 1 or 2 doctors that will perform those procedures, treating every single embryo as a valued, protected human life. But vastly, those who do that work do not associate a value to those embryos whatsoever. When I lived in Cincinnati, a woman was expecting 4 children, and they used IVF to conceive those children. The doctor, this is a renowned IVF clinic in the region. People came from out of the country to get treated there. And he was so worried about their reputation, he told her to abort all those babies and start over. And she did not. And we followed her pregnancy with a couple TV episodes that we did, Facing Life Head On. And the one child came as close to death as she could without dying, but they all lived. And to hold all those babies on my lap. That was such a joy. And to kind of rub it in the face of that doctor, I told her, march those babies down to his clinic and show them to him and say, okay, which ones? Yeah.
Yeah, because I know there's also a lot of, because they'll kind of implant multiple.
They don't implant multiples as much anymore. Their technique has gotten good, so I think they generally implant 2, maybe 3.
They'll recommend aborting one or the other, or oh, you have a boy and a girl. Which one do you want?
Yeah, it's called selective reduction. And if there's too many babies in that industry, twins are acceptable. If you have triplets or more, you are a black mark on their reputation. And so they want those babies killed. It's purely business. And we saw that up front with this family. Yeah. Yeah. So I'm not a big fan of IVF. It can be done with valuing human life, but it's vastly not. And actually there are agents, nonprofits that are matching up people to adopt embryos and give them life. And we did a couple TV shows on that too. That was great. We kind of did the full circle there. And that's one way of protecting life.
So I guess like the really big argument for abortion these days is from a lot of women saying, oh, if decide to keep the baby and not abort it, my life's going to be totally ruined, my body's going to be all messed up. I keep hearing this like it's like a whole cosmetic thing, like abortion, having a baby instead of abortion is just going to ruin my life physically. And like, how do we like change the narrative that having a child isn't like going to end your life?
And I don't know if you all heard that. She says, what about the woman who says a baby's going to ruin my life, ruin my body? There are so many women who have had that baby and have credited the child for giving them motivation to do more with their lives. And if you do a Google search, you'll find them. But what you might do is go to the local pregnancy center who may know of a few women who can be a spokesperson. And even if it's one-on-one, sit down or to a group of abortion supporters, say, I was there, I did this, and it was great. And being a parent gives you more joys than you can ever imagine. And talk to any woman who regrets giving life to her baby. I challenge them to find one, and they probably won't. Good question, though. Any other questions? It took me all day to get here, so feel free. I'll stay all night if you want.
It could be good if students could take group picture with the speaker and stay around and still talk to you.
Sure, that'd be fine. Mm-hmm.
It's up to you guys.
Yeah. Yes, you had a question in the back?
A family member that is going through IVF and they have one child and trying for the second one. But when you have all these embryos planted in and you're hoping they'll stick, okay, and then they lose them. I don't get the impression that you grieve. They promote and grieve still after losing, and that's,
You know, that's an interesting question I have never even thought about. Is there grieving for the mother who has embryos implanted but they don't take? Did you have something to add to this?
Yeah, I just had, I know someone who just went through that, and there was a lot of grieving with that couple. They had embryos implanted and they failed. And now they're pregnant again with another round of it, and that seems to be being successful, but there was a lot of heartache. So that is something that is experienced.
That's really an interesting question. I'm going to inquire with my colleagues about that and find out more information. I talked to a family who had IVF done, and they put the wrong baby in the womb. Yeah. So she went through that pregnancy knowing she had to give that baby up. Now that is difficult. And of course there was an enormous lawsuit. The doctor, physician put a lot of pressure on them to abort to make the problem go away, but they wouldn't do that. And it was just, just a rat's nest.
Kind of building on the grieving for any of the failed embryos there. There's also in the IVF industry a lot of like extra fertilized eggs that then basically just get sold to laboratories for stem cell research. It has yielded nothing.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, I'm not so sure there is either. Grieving for there are hundreds of thousands of frozen embryos in storage. We have some victories of some being frozen for 20-some years and then being born a young adult, so to speak. It's kind of all twisted. But yeah, a lot of them are used for stem cell research, and they kill so many human embryos through that, but they have zilch to show for it. Zilch. And when you talk about adult stem cells, they are treating so many diseases, and there have been so many cures using adult stem cells. It is absolutely phenomenal. And we have a website that we work with that catalogs all those victories and conditions that have been treated with adult stem cells. It is just the coolest science ever, yeah. Yes?
Yeah, so building off of what he said, are aborted fetal cells being used to develop like vaccines and like food and stuff like that?
Good question. It's out there that Pepsi used fetal cells. What they did, it doesn't go in the product. So you don't have to worry about drinking Pepsi and drinking fetal cells. It was used they can do taste testing without humans by using tissue and various things. It's kind of bizarre. But yeah, so that involves using fetal tissues to do the science behind taste reactions. You get a chemical reaction, which then is paired up with a taste reaction. So it's kind of bizarre, but that's what Pepsi was doing. And there was talk too about fetal tissue and cosmetics, but the problem is it would be so astronomically expensive to do that I don't think there's a lot of truth to that. They might have tried it, but did that answer your question, or okay, good. Sometimes we just kind of go off on a tangent here. Yes?
The more man and science intervenes, the more it jeopardizes sanctity of life.
Yeah, the more man intervenes, the more...
The more he takes credit, the more he can accomplish. Is your reverency or your respect for sanctity of life?
Yeah.
It becomes a tool to create what you want versus a blessing.
But when they use human embryos that die to advance science, it's not working. It's not working. And long ago, they've ditched it. If you follow the money, you'll see that they quietly set aside. California passed a statewide referendum that invested billions of dollars into embryonic stem cell research. Zero to show, and they wanted to renew that money to get billions more to keep beating a dead horse, so to speak. That was such an enormous victory that we got in the fact that adult or embryonic stem cells just tanked, totally tanked. But the media accused us pro-lifers of putting ideology ahead of science. And that was just flipped in reality. But, you know, the media aren't reporting on any of those things that come out. If you just stick around long enough and follow it, the truth has a way of coming out. It has taken us 23 years to deal with the FDA. The judge that's on our side here said that we're doing this 23 years later because the FDA stonewalled inquiries all that time when they're supposed to respond to those within 180 days. The law requires that. They never did. So that's why we're in the courts now. So there are a lot of opinions about Donald Trump, but I'll tell you, he has done more to advance the cause of life than any politician ever, ever, ever. And not only did we reverse Roe, we got a lot of good judges in there. Judge Kaczmarek is one of those that was appointed by Trump that is now changing the landscape of abortion after Roe changed the landscape of abortion. So love him or not, I'll tell you what, he's the most pro-life president we've ever had, and he did enormous things to defend life. Yes. Yes?
Back to a more local level, I guess. In your counseling work, you probably dealt with men who have just been through an abortion experience, men who maybe it happened 20, 30, 40 years ago. At some point, they probably have realized, if they're coming to you, that it was a great evil. I guess, what's the difference, and how do we catch the men to like help them when they have that realization, when they're like, oh, this is something that went wrong in my life?
Yeah, and normally we don't catch them soon, which is the best thing to do. But there is so much propaganda out there that men have no right to intervene or offer an opinion unless it's supportive of abortion, that it's hard for them to acknowledge that they have a problem with abortion. But when it gets to the point where it rattles them and they think their life is coming down around them, that's when we usually get them. But the same thing with women. Usually we don't have the opportunity to provide healing for them unless it's sometime after also. So everyone's different. And their response is different. That's why I like to do one-on-one counseling. And if I do a group, I don't want to do more than 3 or 4 because the guys that don't talk like to hide behind the guys that do. So, yeah. Okay. Well, thank you so much for listening and your participation. Appreciate that.